this, talking about this kind of stuff, Libertarian things, is his life. It's everything he loves and everything he lives for. And any conference of this nature, and probably this one, number one, is his best possible way to spend his time. His work is his, as they all love to say, passion. It's not a word I like, but his work is certainly the love of his life.
What about you?
I'm afraid I have a sad second, third, or fourth to the work. So, I will let him now proceed to do what he does best.
Well, Francis in fact comes fourth. First comes the work, then second is the work, and third is the work, and then no, in fact she comes first. As you well know, those who know us well know that when you're married to Francis, she comes first. And nothing else will go. Okay, the topic I've been assigned is something on which Jaco and I are going to do a joint session. I'll just quickly say a few comments about the topic, and then Jaco can add his, and then we'll do a question and answer session, and both of us found the questions very, very easy. We struggle a bit with the answers, that's a different issue. So what I'm going to do is this question of why do people not want Orania to secede or be truly independent or sovereign, or for that matter, a Buddhist state or whatever. I decided the last minute to do a presentation, but couldn't get it ready in time, so there's some nice images which I'll maybe let scroll later on during tea or whatever. But amongst them were images showing that Mandela visited Orania and got on quite well with your dad. And then Zuma visited here, and you actually said that it was a great meeting and it went well, and he said you're part of them and he's part of you, and so on, and so people forget that. And of course the other illustrious visitor they had here was Malema, who came and put up ANC posters. He was still ANC Youth League, and in Orania, and was surprised that nobody had any problem with it, and he was hoping to create a scene and one didn't arrive. So, other than that,
didn't he actually get some votes out of this constitution? Didn't he get 1 or 2 votes out of this constitution?
I believe that he might have got 0.01% or something, but anyway. So no, the interesting thing about Mandela himself, who in his visit and in his comments here where he met with Betsy Verwoerd and he met with Karl Boshoff Senior, there are any number of them in this sort of time machine hierarchy, he was actually quite partial to the idea of a Buddhist state, and he actually set up this Volksstaatsraad, and I was invited to give evidence to it on where it could be and how it could be and how it would work and how it would function and so on. Quite what happened to that I don't know, and for reasons I also don't know, Karl Boshoff was now called Senior, although I don't know if somebody of your age likes being called Junior, but for me you are, or at least for your father you are compared to your father. But he didn't seem to think that was somehow quite the way to go, and I don't think he had a particular interest in it. But Mandela was perfectly comfortable with the idea of a Volksstaat, sovereign Volksstaat being created, and wanted to, was happy to have it investigated. And the Constitution has a provision, as we've heard, that says you can have a autonomy. It doesn't say sovereignty or independence, but autonomy for an area. For me, the question of Orania is slightly different than whether or not there should be an ability for parts of a country to secede. Normally, the secession discourse and debate involves big areas, whole parts, countries literally breaking up, or Georgia succeeding from the Soviet Union, or whatever it might be. But here you have a slightly different thing. You have a minute little place, a tiny little place with no natural resources to speak of, in the middle of nowhere, that can't possibly be of any value to the greater country or the greater political forces within the country. And yet there's an extraordinarily intense passion, sometimes a hatred, in less cases an affection, in most cases just a curious observing of what goes on. But nonetheless, this hatred Minister Jonah Peterson saying that the Western Cape is becoming a kind of Orania, meaning in her language an insult. That would be a terribly insulting. You can't be more insulting about the West Cape being under the DA than to equate it with Orania. To her, that is the equivalent of saying it's evil and bad. But the question specifically is, why does it bother people? Why would anyone care darn if it breaks away? On the contrary, you'd think there's a very strong case for, say, black Africanist, PAC, ANC, whatever, to say, why don't we set aside a part of the country where all these horrible white racist oppressors can go? I mean, you'd think that's something they would want to see. That's something that they would almost promote or force, say, you know, all sort of opposite of the homeland policy. Instead of saying the Zulus have to go and live in Zululand, they could be saying the Afrikaners have to go and live in Afrikanistan, you know, or whatever. You'd think that would be something that someone who doesn't like whites or doesn't like Afrikaners would be in favor of, and yet they hate the idea. It's actually an interesting philosophical puzzle. And so I asked a few people, but the best answer I got, and I'm going to focus in the short time available on him, was from my colleague Temba Chungu, who, by the way, sends his regards and says he wishes he were here. And I said to him, not what he, Temba, thinks about Orania, although he spent more than half the time telling me what he thinks about but what people like him would think, what people he meets in the taverns and the shebeens of Longa and Guguletu and so on, and in the political circles where he rubs shoulders. Why do they hate the concept of Orania? Why is that such a horrible thought to them? And this is what he said, you know, maybe I or anyone, of course, not a sort of question that only someone of a certain race can answer. It's a question that anyone who knows about people who feel that way, whatever their race, color, or complexion, or religion, would be able to address. And he gave the following answer. And it's quite adamant. He just said it's quite straightforward. He said they cannot run the risk of a white place succeeding. He said, he called Orania, he said, I've never been there, I haven't read much about it, I don't know much about it, I do want to go there. And he actually said he's quite a fan of Orania, he's quite an admirer of the place. And he says he has no doubt in his mind whatsoever that it's not racial or not racist. He says he doesn't know where that thought comes from. He doesn't need to, even in his view, discuss it. So he says he sends his regards, and he says it would be easier to reach and so on. He would have enjoyed and will one day visit. And he was himself, just for those who don't know, he was coordinator of the armed struggle in the West Cape, terrorist, activist in Conto Sizwe, hardcore, all the credentials, tortured by the police, etc., hardcore leftist credentials from the past, and is now somebody who's not just neutral about Iran or doesn't care about Iran, but actively positive. He said, I've never been there, but he said, now that you're there, he said to me, I said, I know what it must be like. I know the streets will be clean. I know everything will be maintained. I know your property will be safe. I said, and that is what the enemies of Orania can't allow. They can't stand. Because the whole narrative of whites on the backs of blacks, when you have white people cleaning toilets and cleaning floors and cleaning rubbish bins and washing dishes and doing the manual labor, and it works and it's successful, he said that it totally destroys the entire narrative which is part of the racial discourse and the political discourse in South Africa, and therefore it can't be allowed to succeed. And he equated it with Israel. He said you have a similar thing there. It's a much bigger place, of course, but he said relative to the Arab world, relative to the Near East, it's a tiny little place. Why does anyone mind? Why not just leave them alone? Why is they cause such a lot of resentment? And he equates, by the way, Afrikaner sentiment in the new South Africa. In the old South Africa, he was of the view that the real people who were actually entrapped in the old South Africa were more the Afrikaners than the blacks. The Afrikaners were actually caught within a system of patronage and dependency, and his view was, he told me at the time, that the real liberation in South Africa was actually the liberation of Afrikaners more than the liberation of blacks. And I think there's a lot to be said for that view. And so he says that what the black narrative or the black racist narrative needs to have, just like the anti-Semitic race narrative regarding Jews, is you can't possibly allow them to succeed because it's embarrassing, it's demeaning, it shows them up. And so he says no matter how small it is, how tiny it is, no matter if it's in a rock in the middle of the sea, whatever it is, they would, it's not the place, it's not the area, it's not the size, it's the demonstration effect which it is creating and would create that is a threat to them. And for what it's worth, if he's right, Jaco, I'd like you to address this. It might mean that, as somebody said, the time for you to bargain for more autonomy, tax autonomy, and it might be when you are as little bit of a threat as possible. Because his theme is that while you are tiny and minute, in a way they can sort of try and ignore you, but they can't. Two presidents come here, Malema comes here, other dignitaries come here, they're obsessed with writing articles about Orania, they're obsessed with misrepresenting it. So he says that the bigger you get, the more successful you get, the more of a demonstration you are of cleanliness and safety and efficiency, and that you can cope, the more you're going to become to those kinds of people, whoever they are, the way Jews are to some anti-Semitic Arabs. And he also adds the point that actually the hatred of Orania by the people who hate it, and they of course, some blacks, not all, some whites, some coloured Indians, whatever, some, let's say, leftists, whatever, is actually the ultimate compliment to you. If you were a failure and there were lots of poor whites living in shacks in Orania, they would be thrilled. They would then encourage giving you more land, they would encourage giving you welfare. The trouble with it is that if you succeed, you are exactly generating this resentment and hatred, and that's his thesis. So I would say, I think that's briefly how I see it. I think that it's a paradox, and I think that people in Orania have a job to do. I personally, my own view about Jews and successful Afrikaners, successful blacks, whatever it is that I don't know why anyone gets upset about it or excited about it. But I'm like that about a lot of things. I don't know why anyone cares a darn if someone's gay or not, or someone else takes drugs or whatever. I just don't personally get interested in what other people think and do. That's just me. I just it's my kind of libertarian temperament, I guess. So even if Orania were indeed white racists who hated blacks, who wanted apartheid, whatever, I would still be saying, fine, great, I would still be for it. In fact, I'd be even more for it. I'd say then that's exactly what we need. And so whether the narrative is right or wrong for me personally, and I should imagine many libertarians, is actually completely irrelevant. It's neither here nor there. And I think we'd all support maximum devolution of power. I'm in favor of devolution of sovereignty to the individual. And so whether it's to small areas or whether it's to a federal state or confederal state, for those who don't know the technical difference, a confederation in political science means a place that can secede, can break away, always actually sovereign, but part of a contractual arrangement with neighboring states. So whether Europe is a federation or a confederation, it's probably a confederation in that Greece, for example, could leave the EU. Or any one of the member states could, and a federation is one where it's a single country with devolved powers. And we in South Africa, our constitution is a federal constitution. Not everyone recognizes that. And in fact, we're federal almost in a more intensive way than many federations, in that we have constitutionally derived original powers for local government, which is quite rare in the world. Typically, local governments get power delegated or devolved to them by provincial governments. So the degree of devolution that we have in South Africa is obviously quite small. It's big if you include the concurrent powers into the powers of the provinces, and I'm busy involved now with the DA talking about whether they shouldn't start regarding the concurrent powers in the Constitution as provincial powers. Everyone has worked up to now on the assumption that concurrent powers are national, not provincial. And I'm suggesting they just started implementing them. And if you were a municipality, current local government powers, But here you have this place which is a terrible threat to the extent that it works, to the extent that it's successful. The more successful it is, according to Temba, and I think he's right, the greater is the threat and the greater will be the anger and resentment about it. And you can do what you like to show prove how non-racial you are. And my 3 questions to Jaco, which I now ask, are going to be: one is, I'm told there is a black person who's applied to become a citizen or resident here. Is that true? And if so, what would your response be? Temba, I said to Temba, what do you think the answer is going to be? And he said, so you mustn't let him down. I'm telling you what to answer. Which is, I said, I have absolutely no doubt that they wouldn't care a damn about the person's race. It's about the culture and the religious values and so on that would be the determinant. That, of course, covers people of color. And, of course, the other big group who are Afrikaners in South Africa that are forgotten, not big group, small group, the Khoisan, the Hottentots and Bushmen, are Afrikaans speaking. They have an Afrikaans newspaper. They feel themselves victimized and beleaguered. And I'm actually quite intrigued that they haven't yet come to Orania and said, can we form I don't know, some kind of joint operation, because they have your values, culture, and are in very much the same condition of being marginalized, victimized, accused. If you haven't met up with them, then maybe you need to go and have a cup of coffee. That's the one question. The other one is your bank and the aura and so on. Why not Bitcoin? I would say then you can be outside the South African Currency Union and the South African Rand area. And then the third question I've forgotten, so you don't have to answer it. Go to first answer my question.
I'll do so. If I can just firstly broadly comment, and that is, if I can add 2 more reasons, I think, for the thinking of some South Africans towards Orania. I would say the first one is just simple misinformation, and people who just don't do much effort anymore to be well informed. I mean, there were in the last year 2 or 3 great in-depth articles in the Mail and Guardian by journalist, what's his name? Johnny Masilela. There was many of these very interesting articles about Orania, but very few people read it, you know. But a lot of people read the 140 characters of some DJ on Twitter, you know, where he says something stupid about Orania, he's never been here, you know. While he drove past here and he said on Twitter, I had to put my foot on the petrol and drove over the stop sign. I was so worried they will kill me, you know. I don't know if you felt like that when you came in town, you know, that there's someone who's going to kill you, you know. And that's the problem, is that's where people get their information from in South Africa. On uninformed little Facebook writings and Twitter messages, and in comment sections of websites where people comment on things that they've never seen, where they've never been. And they don't get the information from good sources, and then people will say stupid things about a place like Orania because they're just not well informed. So I'm sorry for them. For that group of people, I feel very sorry. The group that I don't feel sorry for is the forces in government that want to control everything and everyone and every institution in South Africa. And that's not only, like I've said earlier, in my view, a South African problem, it's an international problem. Many governments who are just putting more things in place to make sure that they can have control of everything and everyone. And
sorry to interrupt, just
yes.
I did Temba an injustice. He did say that being control freaks is a factor. That the current leadership of the ANC, as opposed to the current people rising, are just obsessed with naked power as an end in itself. I forgot that.
Exactly. I mean, we see it in places where you don't want to see it, you know. There's places where the government just don't have anything to say, necessary to say about, you know. When you have 24 universities in South Africa and you have Stellenbosch University, why do the minister need to say all the things that he said in the last month or 2? Like, it's stupid and it's silly. But they want to control everything. Everything must be somehow representative of their thought, of what they want South Africa to look like, and you can't allow for some groups of people to be different. I mean, that community in the Eastern Cape, in Yameni, got a cold shoulder from the district municipality since they've signed the agreement with us. So the ANC-controlled district municipality, the East Cape, are now angry with them, you know, because they've signed an agreement with us. It's that kind of politics, you know. We need to make sure that everyone thinks the same. So if you give people social grants, they will keep thinking the way that we want them to think. And they can't do that with Orania. They're not succeeding with that, and they're not happy with that. And they've said it. I mean, it's someone like Malema, more the people on the extreme side, say that we need to control every centimeter of this country. We need to be in control of all of that. So I think that's certainly playing a role. On your question, firstly, yes, we don't look at race. I think I must confirm that again. Our application forms don't have race or anything on that. It's very simply a cultural association. So we can also not say if someone of this or that race have ever applied to live in Orania. It's not something that we have statistics about or that we care to have statistics about. People must show that they can clearly associate with a certain culture. We had a young German, we still have them, a young German couple who applied earlier this year in February to come and live in Orania. They actually applied last year. They moved here in February this year. But since they, let me take it a year further, 2012, they were in Orania for the first time. They decided they want to move to Orania. They love it here. They have their lives were too busy in Germany, and they're going to start a German beer brewery in Orania. And then they took them a year to learn Afrikaans. They studied Afrikaans in Germany, and they came back and they've said, well, we can now speak Afrikaans, and we know the basics of Afrikaner culture. We like it. We are ready to apply to live in Orania. And they did, and they were allowed.
Because of the brewery, of course.
I'll let Timber know that that's good.
So there's hope for Shoals Dagakwa.
You need to bring something to the table. So that's what we're asking people. You must clearly show that you can associate with the culture and the values of the community. That's also the case with the religion. The question was asked earlier on the religion, and I can say we're a very religious community. That's the nature of Orania. If you don't fit into that, you will have to adapt somehow to fit in. I mean, these two people are Catholic. There's not many Catholics in Orania, but they make it work for them, you know. You must accept that. That's the important thing. And there's also different views on that in Orania. You can get before one panel of people in Orania who think one way and the other way. But I would rather like to have normal citizens in Orania decide on that, other than a government in Orania who make these rules and regulations and who decide for people. Yes, on race I really can't say. That's one of those things that we just don't do, you know. Interestingly, according to Statistics South Africa, Orania is 97-point-something% white. You know, it's something like that. You know, we don't ask that in our own census. You know.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's
Can I maybe clarify? Because the state census included some farms that are not part of Orania, so there's some farm workers. That's the one thing.
but it's even irrelevant.
Yeah,
you know.
okay,
It's not for us.
But the media always makes a big thing of it.
Yeah, it's the same as the 4 EFF
Yeah,
votes,
yeah.
you know. Well, I must say I've classified myself as other race. You know, with the Statistics South Africa census, I weren't willing to somehow classify myself for them, you know, so that they can have.
I didn't know there was another. I'm always human. I didn't know there was another race.
Is there
There's a human race.
Is there,
There's apparently another one.
Oh, other. Yes, but that's the kind of things that we need to do, you know. In that sense, I'm also honest in the sense that we still work with a very specific history that's still very recent in South Africa. It's not as if Orania is just some kind of community where
Like the Amish.
yeah, well, we're not the Amish on the one side, but we're also not a liberal kind of community that where today two gay people can move in, and tomorrow two atheists, and tomorrow two of those, and then everyone will just be happy, you know. That's not the case. There are gay people living in Orania, but
that excludes me then.
but in a sense that they're very well integrated into the community, and people accept it's still a closed community. I think that's important to understand. You know, it's not a closed community, but a close-knit community where you can't just come in and do something that's constantly very strange and irritating to the community. That will not work. You know, so that's one thing that people must accept when they move here.
So, for me, that's actually very strange to hear at a Libertarian conference. We've been talking Libertarianism all day, because in effect, that is exactly private property. If you go to a restaurant and they say at the top of the door, no smokers, or no black people, or no Chinese, whatever, or no Irish allowed, that's private property. You choose what to do with your property, and if it's legitimate discrimination to some extent. I know that's a horrible way of putting it, but we've gotten so used to the politically correct way of approaching things that we've forgotten how it is to have private property. I can choose who I put in my car, give a lift, who I allow into my house, but the moment you start baking bread and selling it to people, suddenly you have to let everybody in. That's a bit of a dodgy situation, and people have to remember that this is private property. Right?
I want to argue that this isn't the libertarian philosophical argument about what should the role of government be and should there be a government at all and so on. Let's park that for the time being. In the context of an actual country with a constitution of some sort, what I would say is what you want is maximal devolution. And then you get effectively a sort of what I call the club theory of government. Now I'll give you a concrete example. For many, many decades, if not 100 years or so, the municipality of Fishhoek, just outside Cape Town, voted for having no liquor. So it was a dry local government. And now many libertarians would say, how can they do this? People should be free to have a bottle store, to have liquor, and a bowling club, and a beach cafe, and so on and so forth. But frankly, I was of the view that if one smallish, concentrated community wants to be liquor-free, I was all for Fishhoek and Fishhoek's right to keep liquor out. And eventually, when it was absorbed into a metropolitan government and it was forced to have, I think the first one was the bowling club and then eventually the hotel, and contrary to the votes regularly and repeatedly of the majority of residents of Fishhoek, liquor was forced onto Fishhoek. Sorry?
That's just not true. I brought up in Fishhoek. I've told you before what happened in Fishhoek.
Yeah.
All alcoholics approved of not allowed to sell alcohol in Fishhoek, because every single little club, the bowling club, the hockey club, they're all little shebeens where you could buy alcohol 24 hours around the day. The police were on the payroll, so it was an alcoholic's paradise. That's why they all voted yes to keep Fishhoek dry. And when those laws are gradually ended, I think probably the alcohol consumption in Fishhoek actually went down with it. If you want a town of alcoholics, what you have to do is forbid alcohol.
Ban it.
Well, even if that narrative is true, and
Yes.
my uncle Eric Rosenthal lived in Fishhoek,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
spent a lot of time there,
Okay.
and there was a different view in his family. And Richard Rosenthal and now Michael Spicer, he's had a holiday home
Yes.
there for long. So I have a lot of people who don't think that's what happened in Fishhoek, but let's assume it is.
Yes.
I'm still for it.
Okay.
I'm still for the people of Fishhoek being able to vote against having liquor. And if the people of
Yes.
Orania vote against having dacha or
Fine.
brothels, I would let them do it. But by the way, I can tell you they won't let them vote because they're scared the vote will go the wrong way.
Who needs dacha beer, German beer?
Systematic agreement.
Sorry, just a question. I mean, I'm interrupting someone.
Yeah.
Just on the guy who's getting a lot. Am I interrupting?
No, you go.
All right. So on the guy who's like applying now to to come live in Orania. I mean, you say like there's no tick box on the card and everything like that. But I mean, like honestly, there's still a forum. I mean, it's not going to be. I mean, there's that joke this one black comedian told about like, whenever he asks his white friends, that they try and avoid race as far as possible. It's like, hey, was anyone here to see me? Yeah, there was a guy called Chris. It's like, was it white Chris or black Chris? It's like, no, man, I don't view the world in those terms. And I mean, like, really, as white people, it's become ridiculous. It's really, like, gone to an extreme. But I mean, they're still going to meet the guy. Is it really not going to be a factor? Honestly, your honest opinion, is it really not going to be a factor at all when those, you said 3 constituents interview this bloke or lady or whatever?
Let me answer to that, because for the past few years, Jaco have not been a member of that panel, and I have.
Yeah.
So I could speak from more direct experience. We would address the question in exactly the same way that we would address other questions, like somebody saying, I'm an atheist, or just I'm not interested in going to church or whatever. And we interact with that kind of question. Or I'm a gay person, or we are a gay couple. We interact with those questions. We discuss and say there, which experience we haven't had yet. There's a black guy sitting there and saying, I want to be part of Orania. We would engage. We would say, okay, Temba, it's very obvious there are certain differences here.
Very vague.
Your background, your whole history, your view of the world. You come from a different place than us. That may or may not be a big issue, or it may prove to be a problem that we can't overcome, or do you think we could? And we would enter into a genuine, open, honest discussion about it. And say, remember that even if we say, on the basis of all that you put before us, that you're more than welcome to join, we cannot guarantee anything. We cannot guarantee happiness in Orania, or social integration, or whatever. That's very much up to you, as it is to every other person. One person could have a gay lifestyle and get everybody opposed to him. Another person just go in and don't create problems around him. And that could be the same. There's no guarantees. The fact that the panel has said, okay, Temba, you're welcome, doesn't guarantee him anything. But the point is, we don't beat about the bush. We're not silent about it and saying nothing. We would take that up front and say, you will be the first black inhabitant. You will most probably be the one person, every single journalist for the next 10 years. Is that what you want? Is that and take it from there?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Yeah, so on all these issues, it's not something that you fill in on a form, but it's something that we seriously discuss. That's important. And we had examples of that. But in other cases, we had the lesbian couple applying a few months ago. And at the end, they do live here, but accepting certain realities, about the community as beyond.
Kevin?
Two gentle issues. The first one, the African leadership or political leadership surely already have a demonstration effect that England does better than African countries, Scandinavia seems to be doing better than African countries. So if they dislike or are fearful of a demonstration effect, maybe the demonstration effect that they're fearful of is one right on their doorstep, is one that's far away and perhaps can be ignored. So, but if that is not the reason, isn't the possible reason that they just don't want you to succeed? They want to punish people. Maybe it's racism on black people's part, even if it's sort of unconscious. In other words, a hatred of possible success for people who may have previously sort of oppressed us or something like that, rather than a fear of them succeeding, as it were. They don't want them to be happy. That's kind of a racist attitude, perhaps. That's just possibly my thought of it. And the other issue was, I'm trying to think what it was now. It'll occur to me later. But I was just thinking maybe a demonstration, not a fear of success, but rather an envy or dislike of the possibility of a distaste in the success.
If I can just say on the question of Europe or Scandinavia or whatever, the narrative, of course, is quite simple. That's colonial exploitation. In other words, there is no race attributed to the success of the European countries. That, of course, has become somewhat muddled now because the currently most successful countries are Chinese, Indian, and African. So the idea that people of European origin are the top dog, are the winners, is no longer true. And that itself has, I think, fascinating sociological implications for the future. It's going to be interesting to see how the world deals with people of color being top dog, which seems to be headed very much in that way, as in African countries, Mauritius, which is black and Indian mainly, is now the 8th freest economy on earth. Went from one of the poorest places on earth when I was a kid to now one of the wealthiest. It has the best internet geographically coverage, free Wi-Fi of any country in the world, even in Korea, and so on and so forth. And then we now have Rwanda, which went from a genocidal country to being a spectacular success. Starbucks now uses Rwandan coffee, and so on and so forth. And Botswana is the highest growth country averaged over the last 30 years, and so on and so forth. So I think the idea of there being a racial dimension to the success of Europe is history for two reasons. One is it was attributed to colonialism, and the other is it's simply no longer statistically true.
Do you think that the dislike or the fear of success of an Orania is based on a demonstration effect, or maybe just a dislike of the idea generally?
I think it's both. Temba's line is that it's very, I mean, his answer is it's clear. He sort of doesn't even think it's very debatable. But that there's a sense of resentment that you just don't want these darn Afrikaners, the perpetrators of apartheid, the oppressor, their culture, you don't want them to succeed, whether it's in rugby or Orania. But then the demonstration effect. He thinks that's the big one. He thinks if Orania is seen to be a great success, it will be extremely problematic for the racist narrative in South Africa.
I remember what my other point was. While ordinary people may sort of take a view on Orania. Sam, my wife, before we came here, happened to mention a work colleague that we were spending a weekend in Orania, and she got this quote out on really? That's like a weird thing to do. It's like that sort of place, you know. And I think possibly the reason for that might be not just misinformation, but the way the average person thinks. Leon and I were part of a debate relating to the Pistorius trial, where the average human mind seems to work on a balance of probabilities, not on a beyond a reasonable doubt thing. So if the guy didn't sort of shake his girlfriend's leg and say there's a guy in the room, please be careful, therefore he's guilty of murder. I think the average human being, thinking in terms of a balance of probabilities, there are people who want to be alone, therefore they must be guilty of racism or something. So it's kind of almost implied, they assume it simply because they haven't thought about it, and their mind just works on probabilities.
Yes, and people like to think about a community from their perspective where they come from.
Yeah.
I recently took 2 people on tour, older people, and they were critical about how the gardens look in some parts of town, and that not all the houses are very well painted, and this and that and that. And I've asked them, where do you come from? And they come from a very wealthy suburb on the far east of Pretoria. And I've asked them, now, just tell me, let's just talk. Where do the people live who clean your house? And the people who work in the supermarket, who stack the racks in the supermarket, and who are the people who work for the municipality who clean your streets? Now, if you need to create a community of 1,000 people, proportionally from all those people who do all those services, will it look like that suburb where you come from? You know, will all the houses look like this and the nice, perfect gardens? It will not look like that. That's Orania. In Orania, you sometimes live next to your children are in the same school. The guy who earns 50,000 rand, his child sits next to the guy who earns 3,000 or 4,000 rand, who works with a wheelbarrow on a building site. You know, you can't expect that guy who uses a wheelbarrow in the sun all day to have a perfect garden with a fountain, you know, that's nice and well painted house. We all hope that it can look like that, but it's unrealistic. So that's sometimes people's perceptions. I mean, my fault also. You know, I came here the first time in 2001 and had that same wrong view of how the world must look, what the world must look like. Okay, sorry, there.
My question was about the selection committee or the trio. How big is the pool from which they get selected? On what basis are they selected? And do they have to all concur on a decision? And if they are divided, or if the petitioner objects to their finding, is there an appeals process? Is there somebody else to review their decision?
That's very interesting, Carl. You want to answer? I also know the answer, but you will give it even a better answer.
I think it's a panel of 18 from which
No, there's now 30 people.
30 people.
30 people. It was
on the panel.
expanded to 30
Yeah.
people. Yes, 30 or 32.
The moderators.
They are nominated every year at an
Yeah.
annual meeting of the community. It's very seldom a non-consensus decision. It's normally a consensus decision. It's a very small fraction that ever get decided negatively. It's not the whole setup is not, will this be a yes or a no? It's an interaction that takes place in the space of what do you expect, what would the realities be, what would the challenges be of living in Orania. There's quite a bit of orientation in that process that takes place. If an applicant wants to appeal, there's an appeal process, which is well spelled out.
Yeah, it's well written out how you can appeal a decision, yes. But that happens really. What we also have, in some instances, you know, we will give someone a 3-month period. And that's simply like you will find someone who came out of jail 6 months or 12 months ago, and he committed some very serious crime, and now he tells you that, and we say, okay, well, show us in 3 months that you can really, well, we're going to monitor you, we're going to look after you, you know, we don't want to just say, no, you're not welcome, you know.
Or get a fair share.
You're rehabilitated.
Or get a fair share.
Hopefully not. Well, when I say serious in Orania, serious crime is something different than serious crimes outside. You know, we haven't in 25 years seen any murder or rape or anything like that. But so there's also those options built into. So this panel can say to someone, you've got a tough life. There's a lot of issues in your life, you know. So we will give you some time, show us that you want to integrate into the community, and come back in a few weeks' time and we talk about it again.
Well, now I was just going to describe 2 conversations I had about Orania. The one is a woman, not a close friend, but I told her I was coming, and she said, oh yes, but they're complete hypocrites because they employ blacks to do all their housework. That was the one. And the other one, who was in the Postnet where I had the programs printed, she said, oh, Orania, you should take lots of photographs, tell us what it's like. Maybe we want to move there. So,
yeah, we still have a lot of work to do to just get people to better understand that it's really it's a normal place, you know, that picture of high fences and very militarized ideas, you know, and an old South African flag on every second street, you know. People have like pictures in their head, and there's nothing like that in Orania. We're not that much also of a politicized community. I really think that we talk and think less about politics in Orania than most people outside of Orania, because when you live here and you're very much involved in this community, the politics of South Africa don't bother you that much anymore. So there's not a lot of political talk, you know, that people constantly in discussion about all these issues and these problems in South Africa. I've said to a friend also recently who keep complaining to me about crime problems in South Africa. I said, I know it's bad, but it's not something that I worry about. I've stopped worrying about that. Sorry, I'm really saying sorry there for that, but that's why I'm here, you know. I'm not going to sleep light every night because I'm worried about that, you know. We only have lots of snakes and things like that.
We've got just over 5 minutes and we've got 5 people. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You were 4, okay, 1.
Yeah, just in the, in the context, I think, of your talk and what Gavin also added, I think we must also look at the broader African context. The ability of Africans in general to deal with minority issues, as you might know, is extremely limited. And I always laugh when people talk about democracy being such a great system, because for many African governments, democracy simply means the ability of the majority to oppress the minority. It's almost a duty that they must do. And so further to just that general principle that, you know, Orania perhaps we're not talking about the black government in the majority in power versus a small enclave of Afrikaner interests. You know, it's a black-white thing, but it's a broader issue because even in most of the independent states, these issues are there. They are just oppressed. And often they arise. I mean, we've just seen South Sudan secede from North Sudan. It's not any different really from this. Human beings who they are, where they can take advantage, to oppress people is nice. I mean, if you can do it and get away with it, why not? There is definitely that element. 2, I think in the context of South Africa also, you look at how the ANC gets very concerned about the Mid-Vaal municipality. Now they want to expand it and include more areas so that the vote can't go to the DA. Similar concept with the Western Cape. It can't be allowed to succeed because then it shows off that other people can do better. These things are there. And I think that, you know, we just can't deny them. To the onlooker who came from Mars and you said, well, which is a better area? Where would you rather be governed? It's obvious. They don't like the obvious situation. So they must stop it by any means possible.
Thank you. Number 2? Who's 2?
I have nothing.
Are you a 2?
Just some comments and a question. The prayers toward the end and during the services are never about praying for wealthy people to become wealthier, which is the obvious thought if you want to uplift the poor and create jobs and have opportunity. It's always about the underdog, the subwoofer, the underclass, and how they can be restored. So
just visit Rayma occasionally.
That's the point I wanted to make, is that there seems possibly to be an inherent thing in humanity, and it could just be a bad gene or whatever, that people don't like someone else being successful because it shows them up. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, I'm from Grahamstown, so it's quite a small community. There's one group of Afrikaners that you've left out of the equation, and give or take a few 100,000, I'm not sure, but it's probably close on 2.5 million of coloured South Africans, classified by the previous and the current regime. These are people who have strong Christian principles largely, who do enjoy the occasional brandy and coke, love rugby, and whose first language and mother tongue is Afrikaans and has been for 2, 3, 4 generations. Have you reached out to those people? Many of whom who are highly skilled and able, reached out to them as a potential population?
Yes, well, not enough, but yes, we do that. One thing, we're in the Northern Cape. The Northern Cape is mostly populated by Afrikaans-speaking coloured people. And that's why it makes sense to be here, for us to be here. And if you look from here to the West Coast, that's the people who live here. Carl's brother actually recently went and had discussions with a number of these small coloured communities close to the West Coast, because they're having all kinds of issues with government. They first trusted government, and now the government came onto them, you know. And they had property rights over some pieces of land here in the province that they gave up, you know, and now they're not so happy about that anymore. So we also want to include them in this network of communities, and I think the friendship between us and the coloured community are improving as time is going by. You know, there was also certainly a feeling amongst many colored people towards Afrikaners previously, but I think that's past, that's changed. You know, many colored people will tell you they feel just, you've said, just the way, same way classified as it was in the previous government. Previously they were not white enough, now they're not black enough, you know, that kind of thinking. So I think that relationship is certainly improving.
Quick last question. Do you still have a shortage of housing? Yeah.
Sorry?
A year and a half ago there was a shortage of housing.
Yes,
is that still
yeah,
the
we
case?
have a serious shortage of housing. That's why house prices are so high, rental income are increasing, and it's actually a bottleneck because incomes are increasing at the same level.
Who was next?
Yeah.
I think it was Andrew.
We're on number 4 now.
You listed the people who oppose the opponents of Orania. I think you left out probably the most important opponents of all, and that's politically correct whites. So if you went to the social sciences departments of UCT or WITS, if you spoke to white journalists on the Cape Times, for example, you'd find more ferociously opposed to the success of Orania than any blacks in the ANC, for various interesting psychological reasons. And I believe the number one reason is those politically correct whites are actually deep racists themselves, who think blacks are inferior and they don't want this to be pointed out.
Yeah, we've been involved in politics, especially with municipal elections. I know that 1,300 votes is going to put you in a damn good position of getting a councillor seat. Are you guys contesting? Do you have an Orania candidate that you put forward in elections? Do you have representation in the government? And if so, how are you using that to leverage your position as Orania?
No, we don't. We had a court case in 1999 because we had our own municipality till the new municipal system came into place in 2000. December 2000, you all remember there was an election, December 2000, and the new municipal dispensation came into place where it was now this larger municipalities in the country. Before that we had our own municipality. We fought for that with the demarcation board and everything. They didn't want to give that to us. We went to the court 2 days before the election and we settled with government. Because otherwise the election in South Africa would not be able to take place. So we've settled with them to say that we can go on to deliver our own municipal services, do our own thing, but the new system can be put in place on a map. We're part of Tembe legally, but we do our own thing, and the dispute will be settled later on. You know, that's something that the settlement said. That was in 2000. So we then kept electing our own council since then. And we say we don't want to have one seat on the council of some other municipality. We will more, you know. So we in a sense boycott the municipal election. We allow them, the IEC, to open their place here, and they're very bored because they stand here at a hall holder, and in another school hall we have our own election. Many people from Orania come and vote. It's not on a party base, it's individuals who are nominated. Anyone who live in Orania can vote, and we're going to do that again next year. And that's the way that we elect our own council. We want something bigger than only a municipality. Even when we're big enough to take over this whole municipality with enough votes, we will say we don't want to only be a municipality. We want something more. Municipalities are over-regulated institutions. I mean, the government are looking into everything that they're doing so much. You know, we're not interested in that.
Actually, that speaks a lot to my question. My question is about scale. In the hypothetical where in the next, say, 5 years, Orania goes from a small town to a large city, or a large, I don't know what the classification for a large or small town. If it becomes a city in the next 5 years, what problems do you expect to face, and how do you think the way that you currently manage affairs will have to change in the event that Orania becomes a city in a hurry?
Yes. Well, if it happens fast, there's always the problem that with so many new people who move here, the whole culture can change. You know, people can just want to have their old ideas. You know, that's very much on economic philosophy, very important. You know, you will find regularly people who move here and who just want to know what they can get. There's this kind of thought in the rest of South Africa, and especially poorer Afrikaners are also thinking that way. So that the whole culture in our community can be negatively influenced is certainly a threat if we expand a lot. Political issues can certainly become a problem because it's a very small municipality in Thembelihle. They only voted, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 people in the last election. If we're more than that, yes, then we can take them over. We can rule over this whole huge piece of land with not a lot of people. So that political issues will somewhere be picked up and it will become challenges.
And I was speaking more about infrastructural challenges.
Oh, infrastructure. Okay, yes.
If suddenly you have 10,000 people,
yes.
then can you deal with that much?
We're already planning and putting things in place for that. Yes,
okay,
we've got our city planning is done for 10,000 people. Our electricity network is worked out. We are working in the next 2 or 3 years to expand our water network, sewage network, roads, all of that. So we work on planning a lot in advance for cities, do a proper city planning far in advance. So I think for 10,000 people, we will be able to deal with that. It will create infrastructure challenges, certainly, but I think we've got the plans and things in place to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I think that's it. Our time is up, and it's
why not Bitcoin?
Burning comments. Oh yes, but you didn't answer about Bitcoin.
Oh, Bitcoin, yes. That's a long discussion, you know. I don't know. That's a simple